Ariana stood in the doorway of the stranger's cabin, her arms tightly wrapped around herself. The door to her stepmother's house had slammed shut behind her forever. There was no going back. She had no family now, just a heavy silence that followed her like a shadow. The wind howled outside, and the sky above seemed to mirror the emptiness she felt inside. She looked ahead, her heart pounding as she saw him. Maxwell, a man marked by grief, standing in the dim light of the cabin, his face etched with pain. He said nothing, but his eyes spoke volumes. He didn't offer words of comfort or explanations. He simply nodded, his silent offer of shelter hanging in the air between them. His gaze held no warmth, only the weight of the past, a past that refused to let go. She stepped inside, the door closing behind her with a soft creak. She felt like an intruder in this place, a stranger in someone else's life. But what choice did she have? Ariana had been cast out by her cruel stepmother after her father's death. There was nowhere else to turn. The church minister had suggested Maxwell's ranch, claiming he needed help, just as Ariana needed shelter. The offer seemed simple, but Ariana knew better. She knew the kind of man Maxwell was, the kind who kept to himself, who had no room in his heart for anyone else. She could feel it in the heavy silence that hung in the cabin, thick with memories of a love lost. Maxwell didn't speak as he led her to a small spare room at the back of the house. It was clean, though sparse, the bare minimum. He didn't ask questions. He didn't explain his rules. It was clear that he didn't want her there any more than she wanted to be. Spare room. Until you find somewhere else, he had said in a low, rough voice. His words hung between them, more of a command than an offer. I keep to myself. You stay to your side. We don't get close. As the night wore on, Ariana found herself lying awake in the spare room. The silence was deafening. She could hear Maxwell moving about the house, but she could also hear the absence of something, of life. There were no sounds of laughter, no voices, no warmth. It was as if the house had been frozen in time, stuck in a moment of grief that refused to let go. Ariana knew that grief well. She had lived with it for 23 years, never once feeling the comfort of a mother's embrace, never once knowing what it meant to be held. Her father's cold indifference had left her hollow, a shadow in her own home. And now, here, in this house haunted by the memory of a love long lost, she could almost feel the ghosts of Maxwell's past swirling around her. Her gaze fell on a rocking chair in the corner of the room, untouched, unmoving. A shawl hung on a hook nearby, as though waiting for someone to wear it. A wedding photograph sat on the mantel, showing a beautiful woman, smiling beside Maxwell, so full of life. But Maxwell didn't smile anymore. His eyes, now dull with the weight of loss, were like windows to a heart that had stopped beating long ago. Ariana felt the sadness in the room, felt it in every creak of the old wood beneath her feet, in every gust of wind that rattled the windows. It was a house of ghosts, a house of memories that could never be replaced. And she was just another ghost now, wandering its empty halls. That night, Ariana heard Maxwell moving about the house, but it was only when the sound stopped that she realized what was happening. He wasn't sleeping in the bed. He was in the barn, sleeping on the straw. She knew that feeling all too well. The need to escape the weight of memories, to be far from everything that reminded you of what you lost. She lay in her small room, her heart heavy, and realized the truth. He hadn't offered her a home. He had offered her a place to stay, nothing more. A temporary shelter in a house frozen in time. She wasn't wanted here. She wasn't needed. She was just another shadow, another presence to haunt this empty space. The first morning came too quickly. The sky was gray, and the wind blew hard against the windows. Ariana woke to the sound of Maxwell's boots on the porch. The house was cold, but she couldn't bring herself to light the stove. Instead, she sat by the small window, watching as Maxwell left for his work without a word. No greeting, no goodbye, just silence. Breakfast passed in the same way. There were no words, only the clink of forks against plates, the sound of him standing outside on the porch to eat, and the heavy silence between them. He didn't offer her anything, nothing more than the roof over her head. Later that day, as Ariana cleaned the cabin, she found it, Elizabeth's journal. She hadn't meant to look, but it caught her eye. She couldn't help herself. She opened the pages and began to read. One entry stood out to her. Maxwell's embrace is my whole world. In his arms, I am home. The words tore at Ariana's heart. She had never known what it felt like to be embraced. No one had ever held her, not even as a child. She closed the journal, pressing it against her chest as tears burned at the back of her eyes. She had come to this house seeking refuge, but all she found was a ghost. A house frozen in time, filled with memories of a love she could never be a part of. And yet, even in the emptiness, there was something that made her ache with longing. For the first time in her life, she realized how badly she needed to be held. That night, as Ariana lay in bed, her thoughts scattered and lost in the silence, she couldn't help but wonder, would she ever be more than just a shadow in this house? Would Maxwell ever see her, or would she remain invisible, just another ghost in the home of his grief? She had no answers, only the sting of tears that she refused to shed. And as she drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of being held, a dream that she knew she had no right to dream. The first week at Maxwell's ranch passed in a strange, almost suffocating silence. Ariana settled into the routine of the house, moving like a shadow, doing the chores as quietly as she could. She cooked, cleaned, and tended to the small tasks that needed doing, all the while avoiding any kind of contact with Maxwell. He, too, kept his distance, working from dawn until dusk. He chopped wood, mended fences, and tended to the horses, his movements mechanical, as if the work itself was the only thing keeping him from sinking into some kind of despair. He didn't speak much, and when he did, his words were curt and clipped. They didn't share meals. Ariana ate her breakfast alone in the kitchen, and Maxwell ate his standing on the porch, his back to her, as though she were nothing more than a passing stranger. At first, Ariana couldn't understand it. She had thought, perhaps naively, that she would find something familiar, something kind in this man, but there was only coldness, a grief too deep to even name. Every time Ariana moved into a room, Maxwell would leave it. If she crossed paths with him in the hall, he would glance away and continue on without a word. His avoidance was not out of disdain, but something deeper, something more painful. It was as if every time he looked at her, he was reminded of the wife he had lost, and the distance he kept wasn't out of cruelty, but out of a desperate need to avoid feeling anything. Ariana began to realize that she wasn't just a stranger in his house. She was a reminder, a living, breathing person who brought with her the possibility of touch, of connection, and of something dangerous, hope. But as much as he avoided her, Ariana couldn't help but watch him. She watched him from the kitchen window as he worked, his strong hands moving with practiced ease as he repaired the barn or fed the horses. Sometimes, she would catch him standing by the fence, staring into the distance, as though waiting for something or someone to come back. She wondered if he still saw his late wife there, in the overgrown garden or in the places where they had once stood together. It was hard to ignore the grief that clung to him, a grief that made him shut himself off from the world. She could see in the way he moved, in the way he spoke. His voice was always low, heavy with something unspoken. There were times when Ariana thought she caught him looking at her, his gaze lingering just a little too long before he looked away, his expression clouded with something he refused to acknowledge. It was as if he was afraid of seeing her, or worse, afraid of what he might feel if he let himself look too long. Ariana's confusion turned to understanding, however, when Jonas arrived. He was an old friend of Maxwell's, a cowboy who stopped by once a month to check on him. He was weathered, with a kind smile and an easy laugh, And when he saw Ariana, he didn't look at her with the same distance that Maxwell did. He saw her struggle, the way she was trying to make herself useful, the way she moved through the house as though she belonged, even though she didn't. He pulled Ariana aside one afternoon, noticing how she had been working tirelessly, trying to earn her place. "He ain't cold, ma'am. He's terrified," Jonas told her, his voice soft but firm. He didn't wait for Ariana to question him. He went on to tell her about Maxwell's past, about how he and Elizabeth had been so deeply in love, how they had married young, and how their happiness had been ripped away in an instant when Elizabeth died, giving birth to their child. Jonas explained that Maxwell hadn't touched anyone in 5 years, not a handshake, not even a friendly touch on the shoulder. He had buried his heart with Elizabeth and her memory, and Ariana was just another person in his life that he was trying to keep out. She wasn't the problem, but she was the reminder that he was still alive, and that scared him. "He's been living like this, just surviving," Jonas said, "and he doesn't know how to live again. Not yet." The revelation hit Ariana harder than she expected. She realized Maxwell wasn't avoiding her because he thought she was unworthy. He wasn't keeping his distance out of some cruelty. He was doing it to protect himself from feeling anything, from feeling the loss of his wife, the same way she had tried to protect herself from the cold indifference of her father. It wasn't about her at all. It was about him. And yet, even though she understood, it didn't make it any easier to accept. The house felt like a mausoleum, silent, cold, and filled with the ghosts of a past that neither of them could escape. Then, one day, something almost happened. Ariana was carrying a basket of laundry across the porch when she tripped on the steps, her foot catching on the edge. She was about to stumble when Maxwell's hand shot out instinctively, his fingers brushing against hers for just a second before he jerked back as though he had been burned. The air between them crackled, filled with the electricity of something unsaid, something almost too dangerous to acknowledge. "Sorry. Sorry," Maxwell muttered, his voice cracking as he turned away and disappeared into the barn. Ariana stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing, her breath caught in her throat. The touch had been so brief, so fleeting, but it had felt like a promise. For that second, she wasn't invisible. For that second, she existed. And in that brief moment, she understood. He wasn't avoiding her because he didn't want her near. He was avoiding her because he didn't know how to touch her without losing himself, without risking everything he had built to protect his broken heart. Ariana sat down later that night, her thoughts swirling. She had never known the kind of love that Maxwell had shared with Elizabeth. She had never known what it felt like to be wanted, to be held. But that touch, however brief, had ignited something in her. She wondered what it would be like to be held, to have someone care for her in a way that didn't come with strings attached. She thought about the long days ahead, the silent, painful days of trying to make herself invisible in a house full of ghosts. And yet, something in her couldn't give up on the hope that maybe, just maybe, Maxwell would one day look at her not as a reminder of his grief, but as someone who could help him live again. By the second week, the routine at Maxwell's ranch had settled into a strange rhythm. The silence between Ariana and Maxwell remained, but there were subtle shifts. He no longer avoided her as he had in the first days. Instead, he began to take small steps toward breaking his own self-imposed isolation, though it was clear he was still fighting an inner battle. The mornings were the hardest. Maxwell always woke before the sun, his movements purposeful, but there was a heaviness in his eyes that Ariana couldn't ignore. She had learned not to ask questions, to wait for him to speak first, but as she watched him go through his daily routine, she saw the strain in his shoulders, the way his hands would tremble ever so slightly when he handled tools or animals. His grief was a constant shadow, but so too was his desire to reach beyond it. One morning, as Ariana set the breakfast table, Maxwell surprised her by entering the kitchen. It was a small thing, but to Ariana, it felt like a miracle. He didn't just eat his meal standing on the porch as he had been doing. He sat down at the table, though his gaze never met hers. The silence between them was awkward, but the simple act of sharing a space, of being in the same room without the usual distance, was a silent acknowledgement that they both needed something more than what they had been allowing. "Storm coming," Maxwell said quietly, his voice gruff as he stirred his coffee. Ariana looked out the window at the darkening sky, the clouds gathering in the distance. "I saw the clouds," she replied, feeling a twinge of unease. She hated storms, had hated them since she was a child, ever since she had been locked in the cellar during one, left to face her fear alone. She had never gotten over it, no matter how hard she tried. The conversation was brief, but it was enough to break the barrier between them. That afternoon, Maxwell asked her to help him bring the horses in before the storm arrived. The conversation was brief, but it was enough to break the barrier between them. That afternoon, Maxwell asked her to help him bring the horses in before the storm arrived. Ariana hesitated for only a moment before she agreed, though her heart beat faster at the thought of spending time alone with him. It wasn't that she didn't want to be near him. It was that being near him stirred something deep within her, something she wasn't sure she could handle. They worked together to guide the horses toward the barn, Maxwell's presence a steadying force beside her. She could feel the tension in his movements, the way he kept his distance, though his every action seemed to pull him closer to her, as though he was on the verge of doing something he had been avoiding for years. As they reached the barn, Maxwell demonstrated how to calm a nervous mare. He gently took Ariana's hand, placing it over the horse's side to guide her touch. For a brief moment, their hands were connected, his rough fingers brushing against hers, sending a shock of warmth through her body. The touch was barely a heartbeat long, but it felt as though the world had shifted. Both of them froze, and for a second, it was as if time stood still. Then, Maxwell quickly pulled his hand away, his face reddening as he muttered a quick apology and retreated to the far side of the barn. Ariana stood there, her hands still tingling, her mind racing. She had felt it too, that pull, that spark of connection. But it terrified her. What did it mean? Was it just a fleeting moment, or was something deeper beginning to stir between them? It was clear that Maxwell was struggling, torn between his desire to reach out and the fear of losing someone else, of opening himself up to the possibility of love and pain once again. The day passed in silence, the storm finally arriving as evening fell. The rain began to pour, and the wind howled through the trees. Ariana found herself on the porch, trying to distract herself from the fear that tightened in her chest. Maxwell, who had retreated to the barn, noticed her trembling. He didn't say anything, but he sat down at the other end of the porch, just close enough to be near her, but not so close that it felt like an intrusion. They sat in silence, the storm raging around them, but Ariana felt a sense of comfort in the stillness. In the quiet way, he chose to stay without speaking. The sound of the rain on the roof and the occasional crack of thunder filled the air, but there was a calmness between them now. It was an unspoken understanding, a recognition of shared loneliness and pain. Ariana felt the knot in her chest slowly loosen as she realized that, for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the storm. She wasn't alone. When lightning struck nearby, a sharp, sudden crack of sound that sent her heart leaping in her chest, Ariana gasped, her hand gripping the edge of the porch swing. She braced herself for the panic, the overwhelming fear that always came with the storms. But this time, Maxwell shifted slightly closer, just enough to be near her, though not enough to touch. "Storm will pass soon," he murmured, his voice soft but steady. Ariana nodded, not trusting herself to speak, her heart pounding in her chest for a different reason now. It wasn't the fear of the storm that had her shaken. It was the feeling of Maxwell's presence beside her, the sense of safety that came from simply knowing he was there. She didn't know what it meant yet, but something in her shifted that night. She wasn't sure if it was hope or something more dangerous, but the walls between them were beginning to crack. When Maxwell stood to leave, Ariana almost wished he wouldn't go, but he didn't say anything, only gave a small nod and disappeared into the house, leaving her alone with the quiet aftermath of the storm. In the barn that night, Maxwell stood in the doorway, staring at his own hands, the ones that had reached out to her earlier, the ones that had almost touched her. For 5 years, he had kept them to himself, afraid of what would happen if he let them touch anyone again. But tonight, for the first time, he wasn't sure if he could keep that vow any longer. As Ariana sat by candlelight in the house, pressing her palm against the doorframe where his hand had hovered, she whispered to herself, what would it feel like? Neither of them had the answer yet, but the question was there. And in the silence that followed, they both understood that things were about to change. The days following the storm felt like a turning point, though neither Ariana nor Maxwell spoke of it. Ariana woke each morning with a strange hope in her chest, a hope she quickly buried. She tried to convince herself that it was nothing, that the brief moments of connection she had shared with Maxwell meant nothing. But the truth lingered. He was still distant, but there was a shift in his movements, a change in the air between them. He was no longer avoiding her entirely, and he no longer made an effort to remain silent when she entered a room. Still, there was an invisible barrier that neither of them could cross. They continued their chores side by side, but always apart, working near each other but never close enough to touch. Maxwell spoke to her only when necessary, keeping their conversations brief and to the point. But every time she looked at him, she saw the same grief in his eyes, the same fear that kept him locked in his own world. She had learned not to take it personally. After all, she, too, carried her own scars, her own ghosts. But it didn't make the silence any easier to endure. One afternoon, as Ariana worked in the garden, trying to revive the wildflower patch Elizabeth had once tended, Jonas arrived again. He was a welcome distraction, with his easy smile and friendly demeanor. He dismounted his horse and greeted Ariana as if she were an old friend, not just the woman who had been forced into Maxwell's home. She appreciated the way he didn't treat her like a burden, like someone who didn't belong. But Jonas could see that something was wrong, that the distance between Ariana and Maxwell hadn't changed, despite the moments of closeness they had shared. After a few minutes of small talk, he pulled Ariana aside. You trying to earn your keep or punish yourself? He asked, his voice kind but knowing. Ariana wasn't sure how to respond. Was she punishing herself? Maybe. But what else was she supposed to do? She couldn't force Maxwell to want her there, and she couldn't just leave. She had nowhere else to go. What's the difference? She asked, her voice tight with emotion. Jonas shook his head, his expression softening. You don't have to work yourself to the bone, you know. He ain't cold, ma'am. He's terrified. He's been stuck in his grief for so long. He doesn't know how to get out of it. Ariana's heart ached at his words. She knew grief. She had lived with it for most of her life, ever since her mother had died giving birth to her, ever since her father had turned cold and distant, blaming her for his own sorrow. But Jonas's words about Maxwell hit a little too close to home. She could see it in him, the fear of loving again, the fear of opening his heart and letting someone in. She had seen it in herself, too. After all, it was easier to live in the shadows, to hide from the world, and avoid the pain that came with connection. But Ariana didn't want that for herself. She didn't want to live in the shadows forever. She wanted to matter. She wanted to be seen. Later that day, as she worked in the vegetable garden, Jonas found Maxwell in the barn, repairing saddles with an intensity that made Ariana's heart twist. He was always busy, always working, never allowing himself a moment of stillness. Jonas didn't hesitate. He went straight up to Maxwell and confronted him. Max, you can't hide from life forever, Jonas said, his voice low but firm. Maxwell didn't even look up, though his jaw tightened. I'm not hiding, he muttered, though his voice betrayed him. I'm protecting. Protecting what? Jonas asked, his brow furrowed. Your grief? Your guilt? That girl out there doesn't deserve this. Maxwell snapped, his anger flaring. She deserves better than a broken man who can't even. He stopped himself, as though the words were too painful to say. Jonas stepped forward, his voice softening. Can't even what? Can't even touch her? Can't even admit you feel something? Max, you're dying inside. Maxwell's face fell, his anger shifting to something else. She ain't staying, Jonas. The minute she finds somewhere better, she's gone. And that's how it should be. Jonas gave him a look, his eyes full of understanding. You really believe that? Or are you just scared she'll stay and you'll finally have to feel again? Maxwell was silent for a long moment, his head bowed. Finally, he spoke, his voice breaking. I buried my wife and my daughter in the same grave. I can't. I can't survive losing someone again. Jonas's expression softened, his voice quieter now. So you're choosing to lose her before she even has a chance to stay? Maxwell didn't answer. He couldn't. Ariana had overheard every word. She had been working in the garden, her hands stilling in the dirt as she listened to the conversation. Her heart broke at the realization that Maxwell had already made up his mind. She was a temporary fixture, a woman who was just passing through his life, never meant to stay. The words "she ain't staying" echoed in her mind, tearing at something deep inside her. She wasn't surprised. She had known all along that Maxwell was too broken to love again, too afraid to risk the pain. But hearing it out loud, hearing him say it, made her feel invisible. She wasn't wanted here. She wasn't needed. And that hurt more than she cared to admit. That night, Ariana went to her room and began packing. She pulled out her small cloth bag, folding her few belongings with care. Each item she packed was like a piece of hope she was putting away, a future she was giving up on. She even folded the wildflower seeds she had bought in town, the ones she had planned to plant in the garden. She had imagined making this place a home, but now she knew it would never be hers. She set the bag by the door, ready to leave before dawn. She had to go. There was nothing for her here. In the barn, Maxwell stood staring at his hands, the same hands that had almost touched Ariana's earlier. His chest tightened, and his mind raced. For 5 years, he had avoided any kind of touch, any kind of closeness. But today, he had felt something he hadn't expected. He had almost reached out to her. Almost. It scared him. He knew what he had to do. The question was, could he let her go before it was too late? The next morning, Maxwell woke before the sun, his mind a storm of uncertainty and fear. Something felt off, like the calm before a storm. He couldn't shake the feeling that the air had shifted, that Ariana was no longer just a woman passing through his life. Her presence had become a part of his world, and he didn't know how to handle it. He walked into the house, his eyes searching for her, but the place was silent. The bag by the door caught his eye. His heart stopped. Ariana's bag. She was leaving. The realization hit him like a punch in the gut. He walked over to the bag, feeling the weight of it in his hands, the weight of everything that had been unsaid between them. His mind raced as he tried to understand why he hadn't seen this coming. Of course, she was leaving. She was never meant to stay. He hadn't been able to offer her anything more than a place to rest. And now she was packing up her things, slipping away in the night like a ghost he'd never been able to hold. He sat down heavily on the chair, his hands trembling as he looked at the bag, at the life she had planned to leave behind. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, a pain that was not just about losing her, but about the realization that he had never given her the chance to be more than a shadow in his house. He had kept her at arm's length, kept her in the distance, because he had been too afraid to let her close, too afraid to love again. But in that moment, as he held her bag, he realized that he was already losing her. Ariana's footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Maxwell's heart skipped a beat. He stood quickly, turning toward her. She emerged from the shadows, dressed for travel, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She looked like she had made up her mind, like she was already gone. I was going to leave a note, she said softly, her eyes not meeting his. The words hit him harder than he expected, but it wasn't the note that mattered. It was the fact that she was leaving, that she had made the decision to go without even giving him a chance to stop her. Why? He finally asked, his voice rough, barely a whisper. He couldn't understand it. Why was she leaving now? Why after everything? Why had he waited until it was too late to say something, to do something? Ariana's eyes met his for the first time, and the pain in her gaze hit him like a wave. "Because you said I wasn't staying," she replied quietly. Her voice was calm, but the words stung, and Maxwell felt the weight of her hurt. He hadn't meant for it to be this way. He hadn't meant to push her away, but somewhere along the way, he had. Somewhere between the silence and the distance. He had let her believe she didn't belong here. He had let her believe that she wasn't wanted. "When did I?" he began, his words faltering as the realization hit him. "You heard. Last night. In the barn," she said, her voice breaking. Maxwell's heart sank as he remembered the argument with Jonas. The harsh words he had spoken, the ones that now felt like daggers. "You said I'd leave the minute I found somewhere better," Ariana continued, her gaze steady despite the pain in her voice. "And I will. I'll find somewhere else, somewhere I'm wanted, not just tolerated." She paused for a moment, looking down at the floor, and then her eyes lifted to meet his again. "That's all I've ever been, Maxwell. Tolerated. I was never meant to stay. Not here. Not with you." The words cut through him like a knife. He had never meant to make her feel like that. He had never meant for her to believe that she wasn't worthy of being loved, of being seen. But in the silence between them, he had done just that. "Tolerated," he repeated, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Jesus, Ariana, you think that's what this is? You think that's how I feel?" His words were harsh, but the truth behind them was even harsher. He had kept her at arm's length because he was terrified of what it meant to open his heart to someone again. But that didn't mean he didn't care about her. That didn't mean she wasn't important to him. She was everything to him, and the thought of losing her now was more than he could bear. "What else could it be?" Ariana asked, her voice shaking now. "You won't look at me. You leave rooms when I enter. You barely stand to be near me. I understand, Maxwell. You remind me of what I lost, and I could never." He couldn't let her finish. He couldn't let her believe that. He crossed the room in 2 strides and stopped in front of her, his chest heaving with the force of what he was about to say. "You don't remind me of what I lost," he said, his voice raw with truth. "You remind me that I'm still alive, and that terrifies me." Ariana's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected that. She had never expected him to admit it, to say the words she had been too afraid to ask him to say. But now that he had, it changed everything. "I keep my distance because I'm afraid of loving you," Maxwell continued, his voice shaking. "Because I know that if I let myself feel again, if I let you in, I'll lose you the way I lost her. And I don't know if I can survive that. I don't know if I can survive losing anyone else." The weight of his confession hung in the air, thick and heavy between them. Ariana's heart ached at his words, but she couldn't deny the truth in them. She had seen it in his eyes, had felt it in every touch he had avoided, in every word he had left unsaid. "But I can't keep living like this," Maxwell whispered, his voice breaking. "I can't keep pretending that you're not in my life. I need you here, Ariana. I need you more than I've ever needed anything." His hands were trembling as he reached for her, his touch gentle, tentative. "Can I?" he started, but the words faltered in his throat. Ariana stood there, frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to finally reach for her, to ask for the thing they both needed, the thing they both feared. But in that moment, she knew that she couldn't leave. She couldn't run from this, not anymore. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached for him. She needed this, needed him, more than she had ever needed anything in her life. And as his arms closed around her, she finally understood. She wasn't just a shadow in his house. She wasn't just tolerated. She was wanted. She was loved. And for the first time, Ariana allowed herself to believe it. In the days that followed their confrontation, Ariana and Maxwell began to navigate a delicate new territory, one that was filled with hesitation, but also with hope. Maxwell still kept his distance, but there was a difference now. He no longer avoided her entirely. The walls between them were beginning to crack, piece by piece. It wasn't perfect, not by any means, but it was something. In the mornings, he would make coffee the way she liked it, silently observing her reactions, waiting for some sign that she was willing to let him in. He would catch her eye every now and then, and though neither of them said anything, the silence between them was no longer oppressive. It was filled with possibilities, with something unspoken that neither of them was ready to acknowledge fully. Every small interaction felt like a step forward. Maxwell's hand brushing against hers as he passed her a tool, Ariana's gaze lingering on him just a little longer than usual. They didn't talk about what had happened, about the confession, about the touch that had lingered longer than either had expected. Instead, they carried on as best they could, trying to navigate this strange new intimacy that was developing between them. Maxwell still worked hard, his body moving with the same precision it always had, but Ariana noticed the way he seemed to be looking at the world around him differently. He was beginning to notice small details, the way she hummed while she worked, the way she had revived the wildflower garden outside the cabin. For the first time in years, it felt like he was truly seeing her, and it filled Ariana with a quiet sense of peace, even as the fear still lingered in the back of her mind. She couldn't quite let go of the worry that Maxwell might change his mind, that the distance between them would grow again, that she would be left alone. But for now, there was a calmness between them that was enough to let her breathe. One afternoon, Maxwell approached her as she was tending to the horses. He stood in the doorway of the barn, his eyes watching her as she carefully brushed down a mare. Ariana glanced up, meeting his gaze for the first time without the weight of fear or uncertainty. She was still afraid of what might happen, of what he might say, but there was something different in the way he looked at her. His eyes were softer, warmer, and it made her heart race. "You're good with the horses," he said quietly, his voice rough but filled with something that Ariana couldn't quite place. It wasn't a compliment exactly, but it was something more than the cold indifference he had shown her in the beginning. "I've always liked them," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "They're honest, you know. They don't hide what they feel." Maxwell's lips twitched, almost like a smile. "That's true," he murmured, stepping forward just a little. The space between them was still wide, but it felt smaller now. Ariana could sense the change in him, in the way he was allowing himself to be present with her, even in the smallest moments. The next day, he came to her with a task, something simple but significant. He needed help bringing in the last of the firewood before the storm hit. It was a mundane task, but there was something in the way he asked, something in his voice that made it feel different. He wasn't just giving her something to do. He was asking her to be there, to be part of his world. As they worked side by side, carrying the wood to the shed, Maxwell's hand brushed against hers once again. This time, it didn't feel like an accident. It felt deliberate, as though he was testing the waters, seeing if she was ready to let him in just a little more. Ariana froze for a second, her heart skipping a beat, but then she let herself relax. She didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed the touch to linger, to settle between them. And when she looked up at him, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before, a quiet vulnerability, an openness that hadn't been there before. He wasn't afraid of her touch anymore. In that moment, Ariana knew that Maxwell was beginning to let go of his fear. He was starting to understand that it was okay to love again, that it was okay to allow someone else into his world. But as much as Maxwell was changing, Ariana was changing too. She wasn't the same woman who had come to the ranch weeks ago, a woman who had never known the warmth of an embrace, a woman who had been invisible to everyone around her. She was beginning to learn that she could be seen, that she could be wanted, that she could be loved. And as the days passed, she found herself starting to trust that love, starting to believe in it, even as her heart trembled with uncertainty. That night, as the storm rolled in, Ariana found herself standing in the kitchen, looking out the window at the rain pouring down. She hated the storms, the way they made her feel small, helpless. But this time, when the thunder cracked and the wind howled outside, she didn't feel alone. Maxwell was there, in the next room, his presence a steadying force. The fear still clung to her, a shadow from her childhood that she couldn't shake, but it wasn't as overwhelming as it once had been. She could hear Maxwell moving about the house, but instead of feeling abandoned, she felt a sense of calm. He was there, and that was enough. When the lightning struck, she tensed, the old fear creeping back into her chest. But then, before she could retreat into the safety of the corner, she felt Maxwell's presence beside her. He didn't say anything, but he was there, his quiet strength a balm to her frayed nerves. She looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest, and for the first time, she didn't feel alone. She didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. She felt held. "You're safe," Maxwell said, his voice soft but steady. "I promise." Wasn't much, but in that moment, it was everything. And Ariana knew, without a doubt, that they were both learning to love again. One small step at a time. The days leading up to the proposal felt like an endless series of small shifts, each one drawing Maxwell and Ariana closer together, yet neither of them fully acknowledging the change. Maxwell had become more present, not just physically, but emotionally as well. He still carried the weight of his grief, but there was something new in the way he looked at Ariana now, a tenderness that had not been there before. It wasn't just about sharing space or working side by side anymore. There was a subtle but undeniable shift in the way their hearts seemed to beat in sync, like they were moving towards something neither had expected, but both desperately needed. Every time Ariana caught Maxwell's eye, she saw it. The silent understanding that they had begun something together. It was slow, like the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon, but it was there. Neither of them had spoken of it, but the quiet moments shared between them, the way his hand now lingered on hers just a little longer than necessary, the way she had learned to trust his presence, told her everything she needed to know. They were no longer just two people coexisting in the same space. They were becoming something more, and it scared her. Ariana had never known love. She had never known what it meant to be cherished, to be seen for who she truly was. But now, she was beginning to understand. She was beginning to understand that love wasn't something that happened in grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It happened in the quiet moments, the way Maxwell had learned to bring her coffee just the way she liked it, how he would ask for her opinion on small decisions, how he had started to hold her gaze a little longer, allowing her to see the vulnerability that had always been there beneath his stoic exterior. For the first time, Ariana allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worth the love that was slowly unfolding between them. Still, there were moments of doubt. Ariana feared that she was just a temporary fixture in Maxwell's life, a passing distraction to fill the void left by his lost love. She couldn't shake the feeling that once she allowed herself to fully embrace this love, once she let herself truly believe that it was real, it would slip through her fingers like sand. She had been hurt before. She had known what it felt like to be cast aside, to be made to feel as though she didn't belong, as though she was a burden to those around her. But Maxwell was different. He wasn't her father. He wasn't her stepmother. He wasn't someone who saw her as a mistake or a source of pain. He saw her, and that terrified her. The fear of rejection was always there, lurking in the back of her mind. But each day, as she and Maxwell continued to spend time together, as he continued to show her more of himself, that fear slowly began to fade. It was replaced by something new, something far more powerful. Hope. Hope that she could be loved. Hope that she wasn't just a passing shadow in Maxwell's world. Hope that they could build something together. One morning, as Ariana woke early, she noticed Maxwell wasn't in the house. It was still dark outside, and the cold wind howled through the trees, but she knew where he was. He had been going to the same spot every morning for the past few days, a place she had never asked him about. She tried to push the curiosity aside, but it lingered, gnawing at her. She had learned not to pry, but there was something in the air that day, something unspoken that made her wonder. She didn't know why she felt this way, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would change everything. After finishing her breakfast and starting the morning chores, Ariana decided to take a walk. She needed to clear her mind, to shake the sense of unease that had settled in her chest. She walked slowly, her boots crunching in the frost, as she made her way to the edge of the meadow where Maxwell had been going every day. As she approached, she saw him kneeling beside a patch of wildflowers, the same wildflowers she had planted herself. The sight of him there, in that quiet space, startled her. There was something intimate about it, something sacred. It wasn't just a field of flowers. It was a place that had become a symbol of her presence, of her ability to make a home in this place, to bring life back to a space that had once been filled with only memories. Maxwell stood up when he heard her approach, and for the first time in days, he didn't look away. His gaze met hers, and there was something in it, a quiet kind of certainty, that made her heart skip a beat. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, something that glittered in the morning light. Ariana's breath caught in her throat when she saw what it was. A ring. It was small, simple, but there was a beauty to it that took her by surprise. Maxwell stepped toward her slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Ariana," he said, his voice rough but steady, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ariana's heart raced, and for a moment, she thought she might be dreaming. She looked at the ring in his hand, her mind spinning. Was this really happening? Was he really standing here, asking her to be a part of his life in a way she had never imagined possible? Maxwell knelt in front of her, his hand trembling slightly as he held out the ring. "I can't promise I'll never remember her," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't promise that the past won't still haunt me. But I can promise that I'll love you, Ariana. I'll love you with everything I have. You are not a replacement for what I lost. You are the love I have now, the love I never thought I'd find again. You taught me how to feel again, how to live again." He paused, swallowing hard. "Will you marry me?" Ariana stood frozen, the words ringing in her ears. Her heart felt like it was about to burst from her chest. She had never imagined that this would happen, that she would be here, standing in this place, with him offering her a future she had never dared to dream of. For a moment, she couldn't find the words. She couldn't believe this was real. But when she looked into his eyes, into the depth of the love there, she knew. She knew that she was ready, that she had always been ready for this. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Maxwell, I'll marry you." The words felt like a promise that she would stand by him through everything, that she would be there for him, and that he would be there for her. Maxwell smiled, his eyes glistening with tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. For the first time in years, Ariana felt like she was home. She wasn't just someone to be tolerated anymore. She was someone to be loved, someone to be chosen. And in that moment, as Maxwell wrapped his arms around her, she knew that everything had changed. They had both learned to love again, in their own way, in their own time. And now, together, they would build a life, one filled with hope, with love, and with the promise of forever.